I'd also like to remind that we are actually on the 50th anniversary of Coast Guard, which seems quite shocking that we're talking about a closure of the busiest base in Canada.
And let's get this decision reversed. Thank you very much.
This miracle hovercraft that they have replacement. They fail to mention it's a replacement. It is not an extra hovercraft. But when you put all these together, common sense tells you there is going to be something that will happen. I am pleased to announce the next speaker, and it is NDP Member of Parliament Finn Donnelly.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this rally today. We are here to say no to Stephen Harper and the Conservative government's shameful decision to close the Kitsilano Coast Guard station.
Thank you. Yes.
It's unacceptable that the busiest port, the busiest station in the country is going to be affected by one of the best services in the country, and that's the Coast Guard. Absolutely. We need to be investing in our Coast Guard. We should not be taking away the services that save lives.
Yes.
We're going to be now relying on, if this Coast Guard station is closed, we'll be relying on a hovercraft that's about 17 nautical miles away from here. That is not an acceptable safety plan or emergency plan. Now, I know there's a lot of recreational boaters and kayakers and sailors and other commercial vessels, whether it's a float plane or others, that rely daily, especially in the summer, on the Coast Guard.
Yes.
In fact, I paddled in here on a 34-foot Voyager canoe after having traveled the length of the Fraser River. I've just got off a paddle, 24 days, and I'd like to actually do a little shout out to my crew that has traveled with me, is over there. And we were on a 34-foot canoe, and we were paddling, and if we had had an incident, if we had capsized out here right in the ocean, we'd be relying on the Coast Guard. If this station, which is within minutes of addressing us, of addressing a distress call, that station would be able to, is strategically situated to save lives.
Yes.
Without that, we're going to be relying on the hovercraft, and as Fred pointed out, other mariners and volunteers to do what a professional should be doing. And that is unacceptable. Back in May, myself and NDP defense critic Jack Harris came out here to hold an emergency public hearing, a town hall meeting. And there were many different perspectives shared that evening. But one thing was clear, one thing was common to everybody, that this station should not close.
Yes.
It should remain open. It should provide the service that it does. That is clear. What the Conservatives have failed to do is consult. They did not consult with the city. They did not consult with the province. They did not consult with Coast Guard workers, employees. They did not consult with recreational boaters. They didn't consult with anyone but the Defense Department.
They don't
And then
care.
they made a decision from Ottawa. I think it's shameful that not one Conservative MP, especially a Conservative MP from British Columbia, stood up and opposed that shameful decision.
They don't care.
Now, we, along with the Coast Guard, have had petitions, hundreds of petitions, thousands of petitions that have come in to say, do not close this station. reverse this decision, make the right decision. Do not wait until we have an emergency and we lose lives because of this decision. Thousands of Canadians have spoken out. This government is not listening. I'm not sure what it'll take to get the message home that this is a dumb decision to close this station. So we are all here today, local, provincial, and federal elected officials working with Coast Guard employees and others to send a strong message. And when I go back to the House of Commons in September, I will take the information, I will take the messages that you have been delivered and that are delivered have been written on the walls right out here at the Kitts Coast Guard Station. I will take that back to Ottawa, and we will continue to fight to make sure that this station remains open. Thank you very much.
Once again, well said. Next, I'd like to invite Vancouver City Councillor Carrie Dankley.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here. And all I can really say today is, isn't it ironic? Isn't it absolutely ironic that we're on the 100th anniversary of one of the greatest maritime disasters in human history, and that was the sinking of the Titanic. It happened in this year's 100 years ago, and clearly the Conservative government has learned nothing from that event, that very tragic event. It's really interesting to me, as I read about the Titanic the other day, that some of the things the Deputy Minister told me in a meeting I had with her about how they would replace the services. We're going to rely on vessels of opportunity passing by to do the saving. Well, it certainly did not help those on the Titanic. The Carpathia took hours to get to the ship. About that time, people had perished. But you know, beyond that, what I learned and what I've been finding out is that can you believe that there are actually 20 million transits of people in the harbor in this area every single year, and the Conservative government wants to save $900,000.
Shame.
Shame. So what does that mean? Those of you using the water aren't worth 4.5 cents. You're not worth it when you're out in the water. That's what they're saying to you, and I think that's absolutely wrong.
It is wrong.
Now, about a month ago or so, I had a private meeting with the Deputy Minister of Fisheries, who came to City Hall because they started to feel the heat about not talking to the City of Vancouver. So I sat in the meeting with cronies. We sat there, and I will say it was a very tense meeting. I laid out all the facts that we had. We said, this is how many people use our harbor, this is high safety, this is why the Vancouver Police Department says we should keep it, this is why the Vancouver Fire and Rescue Service says it, all the stuff that you've heard over and over again. And all the Deputy Minister could say to me was, well then, if we don't close this space, Carrie, what would you close?
Nothing.
That's not my job, that's your job. And I said, absolutely nothing. I said, you know, exactly. And then we went back and forth for about an hour. It was a very tense meeting, and we had long discussions about, you know, they accused the city of uploading our services onto the federal government. We shouldn't be doing it. Your firemen should be out in a boat saving people. We can't get a truck, they don't float. You know? So anyways, we had this long meeting, and it was quite tense, and what I think the one thing that came out of that meeting that really irked me, really got me upset, was that the Deputy Minister had clearly admitted to me they had made this decision in secret, and they had no intention, absolutely no intention, due to cabinet secrecy over the budget, to talk to anybody, whether it's the provinces, the city, mariners, or anyone. It was a secret decision, and she admitted it. Absolutely wrong. So anyway, so the meeting concluded, and I get a letter back from her thanking me for the meeting. Councillor Jang, thank you for the meeting. I hope it was very tense, but I hope the next time we meet, it'll be a lot more respectful. I should have brought that letter. It was quite funny. I was livid, as you can imagine. Well, all I'll say here publicly today is respect is earned. And I say to the federal government, if you want respect, from us. You must earn it. And you can have one real easy way of earning it today, and that's by keeping this base open and keeping the lives of Vancouverites safe. So let's do it right, Mr. Harper. Like Adrian did, I will not laugh at you and say, I told you so if you kept it open. I'll say thank you, and you've earned my respect back. So let's keep this base open. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next, we'd like to have the Vancouver Park Board Commissioner, Constance Barnes, who has been a supporter of this campaign all the way from the start. So, thank you.
I'd first like to acknowledge that we're on Coast Salish territory, and I think that's a very important piece to all that we're hearing here today. With that, I think the first thing I'd like to say is we were not or given an opportunity to even speak before this decision was made. The Vancouver Park Board's mandate is to protect and to preserve. So not only were we not given an opportunity to speak what we do at the Park Board, but what we're looking right here behind us, this base is part of our family. Last week I was just over here in front of the park, or in front of the Kitsilano Coast Guard, because there was an incident that happened out in the waters that we were immediately called and told it was an oil spill. So, of course, the Park Board is the first people that are called, and the first people that we always call is Kitsilano Coast Guard, because they are first responders. As it turned out, it was not an oil spill. It was somebody in a, what do they call it, a something vehicle. I'm not a boater, so I don't know. But it was actually some kind of an explosion of an engine, where somebody actually took it upon themselves to just leave the incident. But this Kitsilano Coast Guard was there within 5 minutes. They had contained the area. They had pulled everybody out of the water. They had spoken to our lifeguards, and we made sure that people were safe.
Yes.
So what I want to say as a Park Board Commissioner, and this is an example of it's okay to realize you've made a mistake. Perfect example for the Vancouver Park Board was when we thought, when our staff came to us with a recommendation that we could save some dollars by fine-tuning our lifeguards. Okay, budgets are tight. We all know that. We're trying to save our dollars. So we thought, well, we're not supposed to swim in Trout Lake anyway because of the birds and the fecal component, and it's very toxic. So why do we need a lifeguard there anyway? You're not supposed to be in that water. And we have 2 lifeguards over at this beach, and we have another lifeguard that's sitting there pure in the winter. Nobody's in the water in the winter. Well, we heard loud and clear, and we sat there until midnight because we're on the ground. Municipally, Vancouver Park Board, we have people come in, they sign up, they sit there, and they basically kick us in the crackers for hours. They say, no, 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 and no, and here's the reasons why. But the difference is, what we did is we listened. We realized this is not acceptable. This is an accident waiting to happen. One life is not worth $250,000 savings. So what we did is we asked our staff to go back to the drawing board, figure out another way where we can make those cuts, and it may be that this grass is not perfectly maintained and that we're not planting as many flowers. But what it does mean is that we're not going to have an incident in our waters where a lifeguard is not there to save a child, to save a grandfather, to save your brother, to save your sister, or to save somebody that has come from, heaven knows where around the world, because we are a major tourist attraction. Vancouver is #1 in the world for people to come and visit and swim and boat and fish and do all the wonderful things that Vancouver represents. So what I would say to the federal government is, you know what? Step up to the plate. Acknowledge that you've made a mistake and right it. Because that's what we're elected to do, is to listen, to advocate, to be the voice of the people, and what we have heard very loud and clear from the people of Vancouver and from people across Canada, that this is not acceptable to close down the Kitsilano Coast Guard. We need them. We need them to keep our people safe. We also need it because of the fact we've got tankers out there. If we do have an oil spill, guess who we need to be there to tell us what to do? How do we respond? How do we, make sure that our foreshore, our waters are safe? And again, it's working as a team, but it's acknowledging it's okay to make a mistake as long as you acknowledge that mistake and you reverse it, you listen to the people and say, okay, you know what, folks, go back to the drawing table, or maybe it was an Excel spreadsheet, they thought, oh, this is a good line, let's highlight that one, out you go. I don't know how they came up with this decision, but what they're not doing is listening to the people that have voted them in. So, to end, what I love is I'm hearing from every party. We've got every level of government today, and it always, and I know I repeat this, but this brings me back to the day when it would not have been okay for a person of my color to be standing with all of you of every color, every ethnic background, every walk of life, every level of you know, whatever your financial status is. And there were people way back then that thought that is not acceptable. We need to live together, we need to work together, regardless of the color of your skin, regardless of what you're making, what you're driving. And here we have all come together today to represent the same thing. This is not okay. We all speak as one big family saying we want to keep Vancouver Kitts Coast Guard open to make sure that we are safe and doing the right thing. Yeah. Thank you.
Our next speaker is the DC Federation of Labor President Jim Sinclair.
Thank you very much and welcome. I spent 20 years in the fishing industry. I went to a lot of funerals of people who work out there. It's not just pleasure craft we're talking about, it's working people that make the economy grow and function in British Columbia. It's the tugs, it's the barges, it's the fishermen, it's the ferry workers, it's the freighters, it's all of those people. And let me be clear on behalf of those people who work on those waters which are dangerous. On behalf of those people, I want to be very clear, this station will not close, period. We are not giving Stephen Harper the option. This is a choice for the people of this province and the people of this city, and it will not be closing. I want to tell you right now, they won't get away with it.
Yes.
And we need to make it a symbol about building the future of Canada where everybody's taken care of again. And Stephen Harper, let me say this, and I say it loudly and clearly. We're not abandoning the ship and we're not going down with it. You're the one that's getting off the ship, buddy. We've had enough of it. You're the one that's going.
The sooner the better.
So let me say to the workers in this building and the people who are here, the labor movement will not rest as long as they're going to close this place. We will not rest. And long after Stephen Harper's a terrible footnote in our history, and the only offices that are closed are the Conservative Party people who are MPs that won't stand up for this. These people in this building and their kids will be taking care of us out there in the water. Thank you very much. Keep this fight up.
That sounds like a couple offices closed. Next speaker is UBC Professor Roger Boucher. Hope I got that last name right.
Okay, so what's a university professor doing at a rally like this? I've been studying marine incidents and search and rescue for about 30 years. I know quite about it. And I have to tell you actually that the federal databases on marine incidents are very defective. They change the criteria for coding incidents from year to year. So this decision is not on a secure empirical footing. Actually, it's because of the ideological perspective of the government. And at the most charitable, we could say that the decision is based on three major misunderstandings about marine search and rescue, or less charitably, three big lies. And I'm going to use my 5 minutes to briefly summarize what those are. The first is that closing Kitsilano Coast Guard base will not diminish the quality of marine search and rescue in this area, because the hovercraft can substitute for the cutter down at the dock. That is a major misunderstanding, or more truthfully, a big fib or a lie. It is simply not true, and senior civil servants have to manifest their duty of loyalty to the government by repeating this lie. And so the Coast Guard Commissioner and her deputy have been going around telling the media and the people that we can close this base and it will not make any difference to marine safety. Now the hovercraft is a very beautiful machine, well suited to the mud flats, the airport, the Fraser River, the Gulf Islands and the conditions around here. And it does that job very well. But the manufacturer sends weather limits. There are certain conditions in which the hovercraft cannot make way because it rides on a cushion of air. I've been involved in many searches with the hovercraft crew where, for example, the Glen Ringdale search off Entrance Island, where the hovercraft could not make way to entrance, so it had to cut across, go through Paulia Pass and up the sheltered waters of the inside. Now, these Coast Guard rescuers are really keen, and rescuers love to rescue people, so they will press the limits. And I don't have time to tell you about incidents and what can happen when you go over the manufacturer's limits. If you take that hovercraft out in a 60-knot wind with 10 or 15 or 20-foot seas, you're going to have a major problem, and you are going to endanger the lives of those being rescued as well as the lives of the rescuers, who, by the way, are not overpaid. These are amongst the most poorly paid people in the federal government of Canada. Now, in emergency situations such as the Stanley Park blowdown, when you've got 80 or 100 knot winds coming into the bay here and ships that are supposed to be at anchor are dragging their anchor and grounding on English Bay, or when all up and down the coast docks and marinas have been turned upside down by gale force and storm force conditions, believe me, the hovercraft ain't going anywhere. Actually, it'll be locked inside its hangar, otherwise it too will be damaged if it's sitting out on the apron in front of the base at the airport. The only viable rescue vessel in those kind of conditions is a Coast Guard cutter. Now the Osprey would be alright, but actually what we want down there is a new 47-footer that can roll over and go out into anything.
Yes, that's what we need.
Because the federal government, in their infinite wisdom, awarded a shipbuilding contract to Victoria to build these 47-footers. They are an impressive and versatile piece of equipment. If we shut this base, there will be no Coast Guard cutter anywhere near here. The closest cutter will be in Ganges or French Creek, and I promise you that in an 80-knot wind, those cutters will be tied to the dock. They will not be going anywhere. So Vancouver will be completely unprotected. Yet, the Minister still comes and tells Kerry Jang that there's no degradation in the standard of safety if we get rid of the cutter. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a lie. That is a barefaced lie. That is the first big lie that this decision is based on. The second is that extended response times don't matter. Look, so what if it takes a hovercraft 35 minutes? I have interviewed many survivors of search and rescue incidents, including people who've fallen off their vessels, people like Ivana Sliveridge. They all have a different story, but the one thing they have in common is the frustration of looking into the sky or across the waves, waiting for the rescue craft. They've seen the pretty pictures of the cormorant lowering people out of the helicopters, and when their turn comes to fall off a ferry, capsize on a tug, jump off a flaming vessel, they expect and have paid for a viable rescue. There are very, very good historic, cultural and geographic reasons why marine search and rescue is a federal responsibility in Canada. The water temperature, apart from anything else, is why you need a prompt response. If the hovercraft is up the Fraser River getting a bridge jumper at the Alex Fraser Bridge, or out in the Gulf Islands attending to a float plane or some other kind of an incident, and a major incident happens up in Howe Sound or even out in the bay here, the response time will be unacceptable. People here have been talking about 35 minutes, but that's assuming that the craft is at the base. The craft is really at the base. I live on the Flat Top Islands and it goes past my window most days of the week, and that's about 20 nautical miles over in the Gulf Islands. If the hovercraft is out doing other duties, as Fred said, down on the border or up the river, The response times into this part of the West Coast will be far too prolonged and fatalities will result. So, the second big lie that this government is telling is to say that extended response times don't matter. Believe me, they do matter. The third big lie is that volunteers can do the job that should be done by professionals. That is not true. There are many minor incidents on the waters where Coast Guard Auxiliary and vessels of opportunity have something to render. But search is a complex business. It's why we have a Coast Guard college in Nova Scotia where people learn about search theory. And rescue is very complex and difficult, as Fred said, particularly at night and particularly in adverse weather. Whether we call these volunteers royal or auxiliaries or something else, it does not matter. It is not appropriate to expect ordinary Canadian citizens to go out and do the job that professionals have been trained to do. It would be comparable. Let's get rid of the airport fire brigade. There's no incidents out there. When was the last time we had a fire at YVR? So let's get rid of the fire department. And if there happens to be a fire, well, we can call in the Burnaby Fire Brigade or the Vancouver Fire Brigade. That's what they're asking us to do. Get rid of this base, and if something big happens, well, there's a bit of a risk, but we'll just hope the hovercraft can deal with it. But having to do twice their incidents, the hovercraft people are going to be put in an untenable position and placed under considerable stress. They will start going beyond the limits that the manufacturer has set for that craft, and as a result, rescuers' lives will also be in jeopardy. Now, there is a role for keen volunteers in marine search and rescue, but Canadians have already paid for a full-time, professional federal Coast Guard, and they should not be expected to pay again to prop up a non-governmental organisation that, without telling Her Majesty the full story about what they are doing, got permission to use the word royal in their title. So, in summary, there are three big lies that hang over this decision. Unfortunately, these are not the only cases of fibs at the federal level. Government in this country is becoming anti-democratic and disrespectful, and as the former chair of the Lower Mainland Coast Guard Advisory Council, I can tell you I was fired a month or so ago for having the temerity to actually give the Coast Guard advice.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
That is worrisome that the best explanation of Coast Guard and SARS in BC is actually been explained right here. We had the federal government come out here with their myths and all such and scare things. We just had a perfect explanation, and it worries me that this government doesn't even know these answers.
Our last speaker, and I thank you all for staying out in this hot sun. I think I might drown in the sweat that it's producing on myself. But our last speaker is from CAW, Local 2182, Marine Communications Officer Director, Alan Hughes. Come on up.
Thank you very much, Dave, and thank you everybody for coming to this very important rally. As Dave mentioned, I represent the Marine Communications and Traffic Services officers in British Columbia. They are the people that answer the distress calls on the radio when they come in. They're the first point of contact. And they contribute to the Coast Guard mission statement, which is saving 100% of the lives at risk, reducing the number and severity of search and rescue cases, and minimizing the loss of life, injury, and protection of the marine environment. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to continue to provide that level of service to meet those mission statements. On May 17th, the Coast Guard announced that it will close the Kitsilano Coast Guard base along with 3 Marine Communications and Traffic Services centers. Those will be located in Comox, Ucluelet, and here in Vancouver. After so-called consultations, it is evident closing the busiest search and rescue center in Canada is a mistake. The Coast Guard will no longer have a presence in the Port of Vancouver. Marine Communications Traffic Services officers, who I represent, work 24/7. They're the operational backbone of search and rescue. Officers monitor for radio calls for distress and inform the Rescue Coordination Center of those incidents so they can task an appropriate resource such as this at Kitsilano Base. The advantage of the Kitsilano Base being staffed 24/7 around the clock is that by the time those calls come in to the radio station in Vancouver, the crew have already heard the call. They're getting ready, they're going down to the boat, they're not on a pager, leaving their jobs or the beds in the middle of the night. These crews are already gearing up and responding immediately. MCTS officers know without Kit's Base, tragedies will happen, lives will be lost, and the protection of the 1,000 people they assist every year will be gone. Over 3,000 marine search and rescue cases happen every year in British Columbia. That's approximately 50% of all the search and rescue in Canada. In BC, they have 10 lifeboat stations that provide those services for those 3,000 marine incidents. Across the rest of Canada, there's 28 stations to take care of the other half. It's no different with the Marine Communications and Traffic Services Centers. Again, 50 and 60% of the workload here for distress calls are handled in British Columbia. We'll be down to 2 centers. The rest of the workload will be handled in 2 centers here and 10 centers in the rest of Canada. These short-sighted cuts will lead to missed distress calls and a diminished capacity for search and rescue. Listen to our communities, listen to our boaters, listen to the public, listen to the experts in the field. This will cost lives. This will place the Coast Guard's mission statement into dangerous, uncharted waters, and again, this city will have no Coast Guard presence. Why would the government make life and death decisions such as this? Thank you.
That was the last speaker, and just to wrap it up, what can we do? You know, we've had town halls, we've been in the media, we've talked. What can we all do? Well, might be an idea. You know what? We need to talk to Conservative MPs. You know, we have them in BC. We need to go out there and go to their offices and tell them we don't accept this. We need to go to our own MPs. We have some here, but we need to go to them and get support politically. We need to talk to editors. We need to write letters. We need to keep the pressure on. It doesn't stop. This base is still open today. You know, I go back to the fireworks, the last night of the fireworks. We had a cruise ship get into 2 boats with 250 passengers on it. The first boat on the scene was the Kitsilano.
Wouldn't be a bad idea.
You know, and in the mind of the federal government is that the hovercraft will cover for this. Sounds like a great idea.
Conservative in the drink.
The only problem is, during this accident, the hovercraft was doing a rescue 25 minutes away. So, you know, let's look at what's happening today. There's a reason why this base is here. Coast Guard is 50 years. 51 years ago, there was a freighter on fire in this water. And it was such a mess of a save in it that a House of Commons, there was large arguments, and they decided to actually create Coast Guard. In this ocean right here was the decision to start Coast Guard. I'm not giving a history lesson. I think the Conservatives need a history lesson. We need to tell them, look at your history. We decided that volunteers and others couldn't do the coordination, and we needed actually to have Coast Guard, because to put that freighter out that had deaths, it had injuries, we had to actually pull the Canadian Navy, but yet we had to pull the American Navy to put this boat out of fire. What are we going to do now? Would we like to just bring the Americans in to do it for us? Federal government has responsibility. Responsibility is this water. I see them doing tax cuts. They talk about all these ideas. They talk about cutting the budget. Sorry, I said tax cuts. That's a mistake. There is no tax cut. We are still paying the same money for less. I, as a citizen of BC and of Canada, demand services. That's why I pay taxes. You do not take away basic services and give us nothing for it. Thank you for all coming out. Have a great day.